Hello everyone, and thank you for taking the time out to listen to this vodcast. I'm Jill Holden, I'm the Principal Officer of the Early Childhood Unit at the National Children's Bureau, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this vodcast for primary schools to support with the implementation of the early years foundation stage reforms, which become statutory in September 2021. To start the session, we have Anna Jones, who's the team leader for the early years foundation stage policy at the Department for Education.
Hi everyone, and thank you for taking the time to listen today. My name is Anna Jones and I am team leader for the Early Years Foundation Stage policy at the Department for Education. So this guidance is aimed at primary schools who will be implementing the Early Years Foundation Stage reforms, which, as you'll all know, will be statutory from September 2021. We're going to start with some high-level messages from DFE about the reforms and what the aims behind them are, and we'll then move on to some early adopter schools who will be talking about the experiences that they've had implementing the reforms 1 year early. So the reforms to the Early Years Foundation Stage have two key goals. The first one being to improve outcomes for all children at age 5, with a particular focus on improving early language skills. And that focus on improving early language runs through all of the new early learning goals and the new curriculum as well. The second goal is to reduce unnecessary workload for teachers and practitioners so they can spend more time supporting the children in their care and teaching them the things that they need to learn. So to do this, we have improved the approach to early years assessment and really shifted the focus away from the assessment paperwork and tracking that we know has become quite prevalent across the sector and more towards more broad, enriched curriculum activities. So to also support with making that assessment more streamlined, the early learning goals are now much more clear and specific in terms of what the expected level at the end of reception year is, and therefore easier for teachers to assess against. And the hope is that this will reduce the amount of time that teachers spend assessing children against the EYFSP and increase the time that they can spend supporting individual children. So another two key changes to the assessment process at the end of the EYFS are that there are now only 2 bands for teachers to assess against when completing the EYFSP. So now the assessment is whether children are either expected or emerging against the expected level at the end of reception, and we no longer have the exceeding judgment band. And then secondly, the removal of statutory LA moderation in 25% of schools each year. So both of these changes will reduce the need for teachers to gather excessive amounts of physical evidence to justify the professional judgments that they've made, and will also contribute to that simplified assessment process at the end of the EYFS. So because of all of these changes, we believe that the reforms will aid the end of year assessment and discussion between reception teachers and also year 1 teachers and parents as well. It will enable teachers to provide information to support a child's transition into their new year 1 class and focus on what information is really useful for supporting that transition. As I've already said, it will enable teachers and practitioners in the classroom to spend more time interacting with the children and teaching them. And it will also empower teachers to use their knowledge of the children that they've built up through that increased interaction and their professional judgment to make confident and accurate assessments that directly support learning and development and that transition into year 1. So just to talk a little bit more about assessment and what that looks like under the new EYFS. So to be clear, that assessment will always form a meaningful part of teachers and practitioners' daily role. But the reforms are clear that assessment should be proportionate in terms of its impact on children's development. It should be observation and formative, which has always been a key principle in the EYFS, and it should always be helpful for their interactions with children. So it's really important that teachers do only record information that is useful to them and the teaching of their children, and that it shouldn't be a series of documentation like trackers and charts and tick lists that can be quite burdensome to produce and don't always directly support children's development. On the subject of documentation, I also just want to be clear on Ofsted and what they'll be looking for on inspection. So on inspection, Ofsted will no longer look at internal progress and attainment, and instead will explore the impact of the curriculum. They'll want to find out how much of the curriculum children know and understand and how much they've remembered, and they'll want to see whether children are ready for what comes next. So that concludes the key messages from DFE that we're going to deliver as part of this guidance. And as I mentioned before, we're now going to move on directly to some early adopter schools to hear about their experiences of the previous year.
Now we're going to hear directly from early adopter schools about their experience delivering the revised EYFS framework throughout this academic year. In the first video, you will hear school leaders who will share their experience of the EYFS reforms and how they've implemented them in their school.
The children in the early years are the foundation of our school, so it is ultimately the foundation of their whole learning journey. As a senior leader, I really wanted to understand early years more so than I ever have, with it being so new.
The benefits of the reformed EYFS have been substantial, much more than we initially thought we would see, both in terms of outcomes and in terms of practice. For staff, it has meant a change in the way we plan our curriculum and the associated assessment processes we have. For pupils, helped us to support the lowest 20% of pupils more effectively so that they make progress and gain better knowledge in terms of outcomes.
So one of the other ways that we've supported the early years team is not necessarily asking for formal data, but doing it more through conversations, because they know those children so well now.
How are you going to describe your eyes?
And it's amazing when you speak to the early years leader and the teachers and the teaching assistants, because they know the children so well, they can really highlight the core areas where development is needed, which will help us map out support for moving those children further through school.
We've seen great benefits to the reforms this year. We've really enjoyed being an early adopter school. One of the main points that really has helped us this year has been the reduction in teacher workload. This has actually given us much more time to focus on the children, what they need. Our assessments are more accurate because we are less involved in producing data for data's sake and paper evidence.
It has enabled us to stop, think and really evaluate our curriculum, our assessment processes and also the workload, and this has benefited staff's well-being as well as the children.
In the beginning, we didn't realise how much of an impact it would have on pupils and how much it would help us to make a difference to the community we serve. They've loved the opportunity to put down the post-it note or put down the iPad and interact and get to know children at a much deeper level and support them as a result.
So I spent a lot of time with our early years leader, so that I understood it as well as she does, and therefore from that lots of professional discussions with the rest of the team as well. We've really looked into best practice courses that perhaps people can go on, whether that's to do with interactions with children and actually when you're spending that quality time with them, what you're looking out for, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. It's really helped me as a head of a school to understand the journey that these children go on, their roots, where they start. And historically, I think there's this, they're playing, but now you're actually watching them play and you're seeing the interactions with the adults with them, and you know deep down, I understand the full journey now of what they're doing and why. So it's get to know your early years team, have those discussions and enjoy it. That's why we're all here.
What we initially experienced was challenging, but we now, a year down the line, see that teachers are able to interact more effectively, a lot more interaction between them and pupils. We've seen a significant increase in the quality of the language our pupils use. Our outcomes have always been strong and our curriculum has been effective, but it has just gone up another level this year. We now have confidence that when we have children who come in and struggle, we know that we can help them acquire vocabulary and the ability to communicate much more effectively.
In the second video, we hear from reception teachers about how the reforms have impacted their assessment practices and what has been important in their assessments during the early adopter year.
Assessment is important in the EYFS because it highlights the children who really need the help the most. Our assessments this year have differed slightly to how they have previously, in that we've produced less evidence for everything, but in spending more quality time with the children, we've really been able to see where the gaps are and who needs the help the most.
The EYFS reforms have changed how we record assessments. It gave us the confidence to review the products we were using. We were using an electronic product, using iPads, but also post-it notes. As we reviewed that, we felt that this wasn't necessary for us to do, and actually having an iPad or a post-it note took us away from interacting and moving the children on and more about recording, which actually wasn't benefiting the children. It was just creating evidence for us, which we were empowered that we didn't need anymore.
From my experience, it would be easy to get wrapped up in producing paperwork that lots of other people are producing, but actually for us, we've toned everything back and we've looked at what we really need and what works for us. The whole team's knowledge of these children really helps us to understand any barriers to learning and then to remove these barriers. All of this helps us to narrow the learning gap.
We've changed our approach of assessment. We've simplified it so that it gives teachers more time to interact with the children, move their learning on in the moment. Our workload is tilted towards child progress, so it's all centred around pupil progress now, rather than us frantically being admin assistants as well as teachers, and that has benefited our bottom 20% children so much.
We make our best fit judgments through our confidence that we know the children very well. We know whether that child has met their early learning goal in each area. Professional judgment comes into this hugely, I think. The early learning goals are there and they are where we want our children to get to.
The term best fit can be quite daunting. I feel the best thing is to get to know the curriculum, get to know the children, and then your judgment will be accurate. Because we have changed our assessment processes, it has enabled us to spend more time with the children interacting, which has helped with children's literacy, children's understanding, and most of all their vocabulary. Having these rich conversations has been so beneficial.
We ensure that the right support is in place for the children that need it because we spend quality time with the children. We know where the gaps in the learning are and we have the time to spend with them, and we also have the time to develop on these skills that need developing. We have communication and language as a priority throughout our early years. So we create a language-rich environment where children can develop their vocabulary and build the skills that they need for future learning in other areas.
Knowing the children is the most powerful tool within the assessment process. We haven't built our curriculum around ticking off to achieve early learning goals. We are basing our planning, teaching and assessment on the skills the children need to develop and move on their learning.
This whole reform is to ensure that people have time to spend with the children, they have time to focus on what really matters and to focus on quality teaching.
Thank you again for taking the time to watch this podcast. We hope that you have found it useful.